Good afternoon and good morning, depending on where everyone is calling in from, and welcome to the Inter-CFAR Faith and Spirituality Research Collaborative. Our learning today centers around faith and works, innovative approaches to community engaged HIV research. So we are delighted to have you all on our webinar. My name is Delara Uscoop. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at UCLA in the Center for HIV Identification, Prevention, and Treatment Services, and I'm delighted to welcome my co-moderator, Aquarius Gilmer, who is going to introduce himself, and we'll get into some of the nuts and bolts of the webinar as we continue.
Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon. And thanks, Delaria, for that and for welcoming everyone. I'm Aquarius Gilmer, the Director of Governmental Affairs and Advocacy at the Southern AIDS Coalition, and we're delighted to have you here, and thank you for the Inter-CFAR for hosting this important webinar series.
And Lewis, if we can advance to the next slide. So as Lewis mentioned earlier on the call, we want to highlight that if there are technical issues that you're encountering during the course of the webinar, please put those issues into the chat box and they will be recorded and responded to. And if you have questions as we move with our discussion as the morning/afternoon moves forward, please do put those questions in the Q&A box, and participants may submit questions and comments at any point, but we will be embedding them or reserving them for the end, depending on where the question best fits. So we want to begin this morning with a brief moment of silence, honoring the lives of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McCabe, and I also want to, at this moment, just allow others to reference and name other persons who have been victims of police brutality and violence. And so I want to give a moment before we have that brief moment of silence for anyone else to name other names. All right, and so we just want to take a quick moment of silence to acknowledge all of the victims of police brutality and violence and their families. So may we all have a moment of solace and a moment of silence. Thank you, everyone, for that moment of silence. And if we may advance to the next slide, please. And now we welcome one of our panel members for today, Dr. Khadija Abdullah, who will be offering a prayer.
Thank you. We can bow our heads for a moment as we do this prayer. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
In the name of God, the most gracious and full of mercy, we call on you, God, to please bless this gathering of people today with a common goal of addressing HIV stigma. May we learn from each other and build each other. May our diverse faith traditions bring us closer and not divide us. May our past, present, and future research be beneficial to the communities we serve and beyond. May our intentions always be pure and full of grace. May we open our minds to different views as we navigate our work and come across people who may not agree with us, especially from vulnerable communities. May we open our ears and listen to their voices. May we not break their trust. May mercy and compassion be our guide and not pride or vanity. May we call out stigma wherever we may see it and call out those with privilege to check it. May the communities we serve be rid of systemic racism and discrimination that may blatantly face. May this disease of the hearts and minds be cured. Dear God, please protect our community from violence and being brutally murdered. Whether if we go jogging in our neighborhood, shopping at a corner store, or sleeping in our beds. Please rid the world of hatred and deceit. Please plant the seed of compassion in all of our hearts and let it flourish. Let us follow your teachings that instruct us to love one another and want for our brother and we want for ourselves. If one of us hurts, we all hurt. When we cry out for our mother as she struggles to take our last breaths, we all cry out. We are in this together. Not every man, woman, him, her are theirs on their own. Dear God, please heal the world. Give us strength to carry out our work and not be defeated when struck with adversity. We are doing your work. We are doing God's work. Thank you, God, for leading the way. Amen.
Thank you so much, Khadijah, for that powerful, powerful prayer. If we may advance to the next slide, please. So we do just want to read a statement about the ongoing events happening in our nation. Anti-Black racism and sociocultural barriers are not limited to the criminal justice system and to police encounters. They permeate every segment of society, including research. This is a global challenge that should be addressed to eliminate inequities and amplify unity and collaboration. The Inter-CFAR Faith and Spirituality Research Collaborative is committed to addressing these challenges through innovative, community-led events. This Faith and Works Innovative Approaches to Community Engaged HIV Research webinar will be discussed through the lens of the past, current, and ongoing events. Next slide, please. I'm delighted to, and Aquarius and I are both delighted to have with us our very accomplished panel members. And you heard earlier the voice of Khadijah Abdullah, who is the founder and executive director of RAMA, founder of the National Faith HIV/AIDS Awareness Day, and is a member of the District of Columbia's CFAR Community Advisory Board. Welcome, Khadijah. Next, we have Carmarian D. Anderson. She is the Alabama State Director of the Human Rights Campaign, Alabama's Project One America. Good morning, good afternoon to you. Next, we have Dr. Tiffany Grimes, who is an integrated health psychology postdoctoral fellow at the Tibor Rubin VA Medical Center in Long Beach, California. Her research has an emphasis in HIV, liver disease, and substance use disorders. Welcome. Next, we have Dr. William Jeffries, the Associate Chief for Science in the Capacity Building Branch within the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's Division of HIV/AIDS. And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Stefan Wallace, who is a clinical assistant professor in the Department of Global Health at the University of Washington and the Fred Hutch Center for AIDS Research. In the house and ballroom community, he is known as Stefan Blahnik, chairman and president of the iconic House of Blahnik. Again, we are just delighted to have each and every one of you. And I want to just take a moment to invite our panelists to open up about their work, and maybe in 1 minute, if they would like to kind of share a little bit more than the details that I have shared here.
I guess I can go first. I wasn't sure. So I'm the founder of RAHMA, which means Reaching All HIV-Positive Muslims in America. And we originally started focusing on the Muslim community, focusing on HIV stigma, raising awareness, providing testing, and calling out our faith leaders. And then we became more interfaith and now work with other faith traditions as well. So we work with the Jewish community, Christian community, Hindu, Buddhist, Sikh, Baha'i, and we worked together to do the Faith HIV/AIDS Awareness Day. That first year, we had about 150K people that we reached, and it was a very, very beautiful gathering. But our main goal is to address HIV stigma in faith communities and creating safe spaces.
Thank you, Khadijah. Would anyone else like to elaborate on their work?
Good morning or good afternoon to the world. So I'm Carmarian D. Anderson and now Anderson Harvey. I recently got wed. I'm no longer on that market of being single. Praise the Lord. My calling is now for sure. But nevertheless, it's an honor to actually be part of this panelist, this diverse panelist. I am the Alabama State Director for the Human Rights Campaign that is based in D.C. It's a great opportunity for someone who is a Black woman of trans experience to be their first person leadership in their conception of their history. The work that I do for the HRC is part of a Project One America, and we can be here for days to explain what that is. But certainly the easiest way is I get an opportunity to take my intersectionality of my Southern reach, mix it together with a little grease and butter, and be able to produce change from electoral and as well also from voting and also bringing the community together towards equality. I'm no stranger to public health. I served almost a decade and a half in public health prior to coming to the Human Rights Campaign, really focusing on the marginalizations or the marginalized within the marginalization of our demographic population, particularly our trans-identified community. Finally, I would like to say it's great to be always in partnership with Reverend Aquarius, where I also serve in clergy with the Fellowship of Affirming Ministry, where I have the opportunity of co-leading all of our trans initiatives for the Fellowship of Affirming Ministry, which is Bishop Yvette Flunder. So thank you so much for the invite, and I look forward to this amazing conversation.
Congratulations again on your wedding, Carmarian, and thank you so much for joining us this morning and after. Would any other our panelists, any other of our panelists like to share a little bit more about their work?
This is Tiffany Grimes. I am a psychology fellow at the Long Beach VA Medical Center here in California, and it's so lovely to be on this panel with Southern folks. I'm originally from Mobile, Alabama, so it feels good. It feels like being back at home, and I spent a little time in DC as well. So I'm honored to be here. Currently, my focus is purely clinical, but obviously going through a PhD program, I did lots of research, so I'm happy to share my experience on the research side and look forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. I'll give our last two panelists opportunities to jump in, and if not, I will turn it over to my co-moderator, Aquarius.
Good afternoon. I'm Billy Jeffries, and in addition to what appears on the screen regarding my current work, my research focuses on social and structural factors that increase vulnerability to HIV infection, especially for African Americans and gay and bisexual men. And I'm pleased to be with you all today.
Hi there, Stefan Wallace, originally from Los Angeles. And I've lived all over the U.S. actually. And in addition to what's there, have been involved in HIV and public health work for over 2 decades and been involved in community mobilization and engagement work for more than 25 years. I'm a Scorpio and my favorite color is red.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. I'll turn it over to Aquarius to get us started with some of our questions and discussion for this morning.
Thank you, Delara, and all of our amazing panelists. This is like a rock star panel, so I'm certain that I and the folks who are listening will learn so much from having spent our time together with you today. So to start our conversation, I just want to point this question to Dr. Grimes. And given that our webinar today is about community engagement and community research, can you give us an orientation and share with us what is community-based participatory research?
Yes, certainly. So there's a lot that could be said about community-based participatory research, but I'm just going to give us a quick overview today. So basically, from the foundations, community-based participatory research involves community members collaborating with researchers and/or academic investigators in each step of the research process. So oftentimes we think of research as being the traditional research model, which is very outside expert approach. where, we've seen that has been poorly suited to facilitating desired changes, whereas CBPR offers an approach that joins with the community as full and equal partners in all phases of the research process. So CBPR has been shown to be especially successful in working toward the reduction of health disparities, especially within communities with unique needs and who are impacted by oppressive systems and conditions. So if you look at the historical roots of CBPR, we can trace it back to the development of participatory action research by the social psychologist Kurt Lewin. And it's also been used, throughout time, and we've seen it evolve over time. And some of the main characteristics of CBPR include recognizing the community as a unit of identity, building on the strengths and resources of the community, promoting co-learning among research partners, achieving a balance between research and action that mutually benefits both science and the community, emphasizing the relevance of community-defined problems, employing a cyclical and iterative process to develop and maintain community and research partnerships, disseminating knowledge gained from the CBPR project to and by all involved partners, and it requires a long-term commitment on the part of all the partners involved. So some of the strengths or advantages that we aim to achieve through CBPR are that it allows for the innovative adaptation of existing resources, explores and incorporates local knowledge and perceptions. It empowers participants and their communities by acknowledging them as agents who can investigate their own situations. And community input makes the project credible, enhancing its usefulness by aligning it with the community and the community's perceived social and health goals. And it joins research participants who have varied skills, knowledge, and expertise to address complex problems in complex situations. It can also provide resources for the involved communities, and through its collaborative nature, provides a forum that can bridge across cultural differences among the participants. And it can also really work to dismantle the lack of trust communities may exhibit in relation to research. So as we know in many of the communities that we work in, and in doing this work specifically, there's a lot of mistrust, which is warranted. And so this is an approach that can be helpful in mitigating and combating that. So there are also some important considerations that we should think about, especially with people living with HIV and their common intersecting identities. So some of those considerations include appropriately identifying the community, and community is often self-defined, but general categories of community include geographic community, community of individuals with a common problem or issue, and as today we're talking about HIV, or community of individuals with common interest or goal. So engaging the community in the research process is obviously very key in using this research method, and managing conflicting agendas for the community versus the partners can be something we should also consider. And we should also be aware of addressing insider and outsider status of the researchers, and just work on resolving any researcher or community tensions regarding data collection tools. And it's important to integrate academic and community members into a cohesive research team and develop safety plans to address participant disclosure of any harm to themselves or harm to others. And it's also very essential that we differentiate the goals or the role of academics as researchers versus advocates, because those roles can look very different. Other important considerations are to be flexible and recognize that everyone has limits. So know your limits, work to develop your own self-awareness with the communities that you are working with, and also develop perseverance and tolerance for discouragement, especially when things do not go according as planned. And we should also be willing to collaborate by sharing authority, responsibility, and credit for success, and really think about the ownership of data. So who does the data belong to after it's collected? Thinking about, how data has been used in the past for profit without compensating the communities who own the information in the first place. And also acknowledging that much of this information is sacred and central to the community's cultural identity. And so sharing this knowledge with outsiders who are not able to understand it or understand the context can erode that cultural identity. So some ways in which we can protect against this is by just really thinking about who we're sharing the information with and how. and getting approval from local representatives before we publish anything, especially in terms of papers, reports, or presentations. Some other things that can be helpful are using a memorandum of understanding between the researchers and the community, and maybe even requesting exemptions from the organizations that we're working with, because sometimes data is used for secondary analysis by other investigators, and that might not always be appropriate. So we should give thoughtful attention to the ethical implications of our actions as researchers, and also consider things like confidentiality and how this collaborative nature might have impacts on confidentiality as well. And we should also consider how some of the data that we may collect could potentially cast a community in a negative light, and figuring out with the community how we want to disseminate that information. So obviously culture is a big part of CBPR, and it's equally important for us to be aware of our own cultural thinking and our own behavioral patterns when doing this work, and also just thinking about the systemic and government bureaucracies and other institutions that have contributed to problems and issues in the past, and how that might impact the project that you're working on. So working with culturally diverse groups requires a multicultural orientation on many levels and brings a degree of complexity to the project that first demands our awareness and secondly requires skillful navigation. So just as a review, CBPR is a cyclical and iterative process, and it's very time consuming and requires a long-term commitment. So we're not just jumping in the community and jumping out to get our data or collect our information. It is a relationship. It's a long-term partnership. And we should also think about any ramifications of people changing jobs in the middle of the project, burnout of team members, especially those who might share identities with the community or the culture that we're researching. And I can speak a little bit to my personal dissertation research. So I conducted 21 interviews with transgender women of color living with HIV in the Washington, D.C. metro area in Maryland and Virginia in the spring and summer of 2018. And so I used a grounded theory approach to explore the perceptions of self-identified transgender women of color, and in regards to HIV care and also regarding spirituality and religion. And so for me, it was important to immerse myself in the community. I showed up to community meetings. I participated in marches. I participated in fundraisers. I volunteered some of my time to really become immersed and learn more about the community. And I worked collaboratively with one of my research participants to develop all the study materials from the recruitment flyers to the semi-structured interview protocol. And then I also called my participants after to check in to see if the data analysis, what came out of my data analysis was in line with what they had shared with me during their interviews. So I think one of the great things we can do is create a community advisory board, but unfortunately, given my time constraints, I wasn't able to do that. So this was how I mitigated, making sure that I was still representing the data correctly and that I was telling the stories that were shared with me correctly and appropriately as well. And also, we should always talk about compensation and how important it is to compensate folks for their time and their work. And I think a lot of times in these communities, that's the missing piece. So when we have the funds or the ability to compensate, it's very important that folks are paid for their time and for their contribution.
Thank you, Dr. Grimes. And I want to open it now up to, that was really thorough, a lot there. I'm glad we're recording it so we can, if I can take even more notes. But I want to open it up to the other panelists and just ask each of you, or if you have any best practices or best models of engaging populations of significance or key populations, what have you all seen within your experience?
Thank you, Aquarius. I think that's a great question, and I guess I'll start it off. I think a lot of times when we think about our priority populations, when we're doing this work that we call public health, and we're trying to be intentional doing this work, I think our intentionality, we overcompensate. And I think we just lose the minute of how do we really engage those hard-to-reach populations. And I really want to speak on behalf of trying to connect not target, because that's a word we use in public health, but that's going to be traumatizing to my community because we're targeted every day, not just because in the current state of our nation because of the color of my skin, but just because of my intersectionality of my truth being living. That will be contradicting to someone else who don't believe that. So connecting with that community, what I often have said in running prevention programs, working on the research side, looking at epi and molecular data, is that we have to be able to feel the connection is real. $5 gift cards at some type of grocery store is not going to work. You're not really speaking to my narrative. And I also feel that we use this word cultural competency, but really cultural responsiveness, being able to hire us so you can have a gatekeeper working for your institutions, your agency, so you can learn the relevant language. You know, I understand that our statistics shows us that HIV impacts, you know, widely our MSMs or men who sleep with men, but we are also lumped in with that, and so we're never segregated out of that data. So we're never being able to be targeted in who we are. And so that really is a door closed and not an invitation for us to come to an area of an agency and feel inclusive, feel wanted, feel intentional. So a couple of things that I will probably say for any institution, community-based organization, aid services organization, is look at your hiring structure. It is okay to hire us. We are educated. As a trans community, we can teach you about our community and the things that we go through that your messages does not reach us. You can't, you know, teach how to use a condom to other population and expect us to also understand when you don't understand the dysphoria that we may have with certain body parts. In addition to that, be intentional writing grants where that money, there's wonderful evidence-based intervention that are out there. I'm a co-author of one of them for those women of trans experience who identify living with HIV as well, who are high risk. But we don't know those things if institutions and agencies don't go out and actually speak. And then finally, I would say let your agency mirror what you're trying to do. Don't just speak. Don't just be about it, do about it, but actually show some intentionality of action, visibility, the work that will engage us as a trans population, our GNC population, and all of us that are really technically high risk to HIV. And again, we're not here to be tokenized. We can be on your advisory table, but don't just take our thoughts to get that next grant and then the money doesn't come to us. This can be a whole conversation, but I really do think that we really need to figure out how to reach our trans population. The final thing that I will say is that look at our current state now with racism and white supremacists. And I appreciate in this welcoming that I actually heard a name of Tony McDade. Oftentimes, when I'm in spaces and we're talking about Black Lives Matter, we forget about those trans individuals who have died through hate, violence, police brutality, which makes my job with HRC a little bit difficult in a southern state, but it also discouraged me as a leader and as a woman of trans experience, knowing, will I be thought of if something ever happens to me? And so if we take the current state of our nation and be intentional in making sure that we do not exclude anyone, we're in the business of including. That's what equality is. That's what equitable access to health care is. And then I think that we will start seeing the rates of HIV, particularly in the South, since that's where I live and lead, we will see those numbers be reduced. We will see trans people being able to be included in employment. And as well, that is what's going to also help us change policies that I work very hard daily to try to change.
If I can dovetail onto what my sister just said, regarding community-based participatory research, I think that there are ways that people approach it that critique sort of the theory behind it, and there are certainly experiences that I have in that regard, as well as the application of that model to do the work. I think one of the examples that comes to mind immediately for me, particularly since part of who I'm representing on this webinar is the House and Ball Community is a project that was funded by the HIV Vaccine Trials Network. It was actually there were 4 pilot projects funded around the U.S. and I happen to have the privilege of working on one of them, and it was called Project Vogue, and it started as a collaboration between the University of Rochester Medical Center and a local community-based organization called the MOCA Center. And the point of this intervention, or the point of this program that we were doing, because each of the 4 pilot projects sort of focused on different things, but the point of the program that we were working on was to integrate CVPR in the development of an intervention focused on increasing HIV knowledge and awareness, as well as knowledge and awareness about HIV and HIV vaccine research in the House and Ball community. So we affectionately named it Project Vogue. There are lots of ways that we incorporated CVPR principles into this process, including organizing we call it a ballroom alliance. So it was an alliance of local household community leaders. And really, in addition to sort of supporting them and compensating them, we also empowered them to really help co-create this intervention, including determining the components of the intervention, as well as the flow of the intervention, and they were also guiding the implementation and testing of the intervention. So there's a place for CVPR work to do this, and I think when CVPR is done well, that the results are great. The community feels engaged. They feel a sense of ownership over the product and the outcome. And when I think about program sustainability and evaluation, those are 2 areas that are 2 sort of functions that you definitely want to be mindful of regarding how the community is engaged and involved. So lots of other examples, but I'll stop there for my other panelists to chime in.
And I just wanted to add that we did a project for 3 years working with populations from Africa and Pakistan, Bangladesh, and here in the U.S. And we realized that you have to build trust with the community. It's very, very important to have that trust, because if you walk in trying to do something, they don't know you, they're going to shut you out. So we realized what we did is that we partnered with GW, School of Public Health, and we were the community organization, and they were like the PI, and so on and so forth. And we brought community members into the community to relay the message and speak the language, because we have very diverse languages in the communities. And then we also had people that were older to reach the older population, people that are younger to connect with the younger population. So we had a diversity of people we work with. And the topic was so sensitive to the community that we had to make sure that we went around it in a certain way. And we also had recording for our interviews. So we did offer money, like $400, because it could bring back traumatizing experiences from their past that they were sharing with us, and the option, of course, to stop whenever they felt uncomfortable and didn't want to continue. So making sure you make that clear, they have the option to stop when they're doing interviews with you for your research, and making sure you have people there that they're comfortable with. Like we had stories of people going to see a doctor and the doctor making faces at them that turn them away, or saying stigmatizing words to them, and make sure that your information on your website is not stigmatizing. Like look at your words, because language does matter. So look at that, look at your brochure you're trying to hand out, make sure you use proper wording that doesn't offend the community, because once you offend them, they'll shut you out and you can't come back, and that'll be it. So make sure you're very, very aware of any potential barriers you might face. And also, I think Dr. Grimes mentioned she did an advisory panel. We had an expert panel of faith leaders, of survivors that undergone different experiences, and they reviewed our work first and gave us feedback, and we had to look at changes, make sure that it accommodated their feedback. And then before we even released our toolkit to the masses, we had a very small group come in and look at it as well and test it out and give us feedback. So it's very important to do your due diligence, because if you release something that is not completely correct, It can harm your reputation, your credibility, and also harm the population you're trying to serve. And then make sure you partner with other key stakeholders, because you can help empower the community and be a catalyst for change if you have the right information and do it properly.
That's great. Are there any other respondents before I kind of just pivot quite a second? Seeing that there are none. Carmen, I love this concept of moving beyond cultural humility to cultural responsiveness. So that's actual like praxis of the humility that we claim that we here embody. So an embodiment of the humility. I think this is brilliant, and I look forward to you putting something out about how can organizations do that work really well, and even your point around remembrance, and will folks remember you and trans women and trans men, right, as unfortunately victims of state violence, but also interpersonal violence, right? I think that's a very poignant question that in the concept of all of this, even with community-based participatory research, are researchers remembering the folks that they're working with as they're doing this work, or is it just grant dollars being chased or a checkbox being, fulfilled? But I think those are really, really powerful questions. So along that same line of thought, and you all have already sort of teed us up in a great way to this next line of questioning, and it is, considering the significance and the brilliance of and the power of the ballroom community and the interfaith community and the trans communities, and how what they contribute to all of us, but and how they play in research. What are the best ways to increase engagement? I mean, we started talking about cultural responsiveness, and beyond that, right? I mean, I think there's some challenges even when folks are hired just to be outreach workers and they stay there in that role for forever. So what other ways should we be engaging the interfaith community, Khadijah? Because much of our work tends to be Christian-centric, right? And we completely forget about our brothers and sisters who are no faith but practice different faiths.
I was going to mention that when we say faith communities, you think of the Christian community, but many times other faiths are actually hidden and not thought about. And it's something I always talk about when I go to different interfaith conferences. I'm the only Muslim in the room. I'm like, okay, how is this interfaith? It's more intrafaith, but it's not interfaith. And so I feel like it's very important that we have interfaith communities that are working towards a common goal that should actually be interfaith. So, and there's a lot of stigma in interfaith communities. Doing the work that I do, people don't even know that you can have children and they could be negative if you're positive. They're not aware you equals you. You have faith leaders saying things that are very stigmatizing and outdated. And, people don't feel safe in the faith community. So there's a lot of work to do about that. And when you think of faith leaders, they have an impact on their following. People typically trust them. And so if we're doing a research initiative that's interfaith, the community is likely to listen to that faith leader. But if they're saying things that aren't correct, it can have a very harmful impact. So I think it's important that we actually bring in all these different faiths. We actually worked with the Sikh community a couple of years ago, and they really enjoyed doing the work. They wanted to bring HIV testing to their temple. So that was very encouraging. And I think that I met a lot of people from Muslim background specifically that have left the mosque because I heard a story I can share with you. We had a Muslim man. He went to the mosque during Ramadan. Ramadan is like our month of fasting. We don't eat from sunrise to sunset. So he went there at sunset to break his fast with everybody else, and he was volunteering. He was helping to serve food to people who were breaking their fast. And someone disclosed his status without his permission, and people refused to take food from him. They thought they'll catch HIV by touching the same plate he touched serving food. And this is goes to show you how ignorance can spread within the community. If we have leaders that are able to share information that is accurate and up to date, it can help stop things like that and create a safe space in the community. It can put pressure And if we work together, it can be powerful. So you see Christians and Muslims and Jews and Sikhs and Hindus and Baha'is working together to address HIV stigma. It can be much more powerful than us working alone in our separate communities. And that was the premise behind Faith HIV AIDS Awareness Day, is working together to address HIV stigma. And if you go to the Facebook page, you'll see the video of all the faiths working together, saying prayers and talking about it on the stage. And it was just a beautiful, beautiful thing. And actually, we had the reception at the Human Rights Campaign the night before. So they were very supportive of the event. And also, I've done workshops in the Muslim community, and research is very important. Because they'll ask me, well, how many people have HIV that are Muslim? What's your numbers? I'm like, what does that even matter? I mean, one person has to be enough. But I understand people want to see numbers. It brings credibility. It makes you more trustworthy. But people are focusing on the wrong things, in my opinion. If you have someone in your community that is feeling ostracized, that's not feeling safe, and you're worried about numbers, then you're part of the problem. So, again, I think working together with different faiths, and we can learn from Christians because they've been doing this work. They have a lot of materials out there that they have been doing, and we can learn from that and utilize it in the Muslim community, in the Buddhist community, so on and so forth. So I think if we just pull together our resources and tackle this together, we can be on track for the epidemic ending in 2030 initiative, and also amplifying voices that are very important. And as I was saying before, I was trying to get some data. I work with a lot of Muslims who are positive. Some of them have shared their stories. Some of them do not want to share it. And everybody has their own, comfort level. That's completely fine. And I do a retreat every year for Muslims who are positive. We meet in D.C., our different states, depending where we're going to go. And we have worked on HIV criminalization. And we're actually bringing people. We had a reverend come last time. We had an elder come last time. So it's like an interfaith type of retreat, and we learn from each other. So interfaith is very, very powerful. But what I want to see in these interfaith spaces is actually interfaith. That's just the main thing. So.
And I'll piggyback, and thank you, Khadijah, which I absolutely love you. I think you know that. What I can say, and it's being someone who is Christian and being someone who's in the Bible Belt states in the South, and being that my goal is to amplify our messages of this love that we teach, more inclusive. I look at how we have an opportunity as witness on that witness for the deity that we serve, that we believe in, to make it inclusive, that we're in position to really expound on the agape love of acceptance. I oftentimes recount, my years, and this is my running joke to Aquarius, that's the Baptist boy and I'm the Pentecostal girl. And here in the South, Christianity leads. And we have to also think about Black culture in Christianism, or as I like to say, or in our culture. And a couple of things is that when I still am able to go back to my traditional fundamental setting, I'm not sure what they're teaching or preaching. It's the same that I heard when I was 2 years old and 4-year-old. And I know for me, I'm trying to make it my business when I'm expounding on, when I have that opportunity to expound, is that I want to be able to preach, not these and thous and King James, but I want to be able to preach current events. I want to be able to preach what our health crises are. I feel that when we do that, we are really expounding on the gospel of hope. We're expounding on faith. We're expounding on inclusion. We still walk in church and, we're still having Men's Day and Women's Day, and it excluding people who may not represent that but still adhere to their culture, spirituality. So how come we just can't have Femininity Day or Masculinity Day? I want to honor those single moms who are having to play both roles. I want to be able to honor those masculine individuals who still understand that they will show up at times in their feminine and they won't be judged. I want to, so I think it's how we show up. And I believe that when we change the narrative, or when we as those that are responsible, maybe connecting with them, agencies that are connecting with these faith and religion spaces, that we offer them an opportunity of how to change their hermeneutics, how to change how they're promoting things that will allow our jobs to be easy. Because believe it or not, in Black church particularly, they will listen to the pastor before they say, do you know your status? They will listen to the pastor before they say, come get tested and, we're going to give you a $20 gift card. The pastor is golden. And when we can educate and when they can turn around and teach that part of their gospel, that's when I feel then when it's retained, that's when deliverance comes. Now I'm getting into my Pentecostal roots. Then that's when set free comes, because we will have the data that everybody is coming together to educate what is killing us. And I have to remind, this is my preaching moment. Let me just do this real quick, that the sickness is not unto death, but it is for our God's glory. And what that means is that we're not here to die because of HIV. We're here to educate so people can still live. And I think that while we're trying to focus on this interfaith, that we focus on the inclusion of what we're speaking, what we're teaching, and how we're defining bringing souls, as the old church folks would say, bringing souls into the kingdom. And we're not doing, I don't feel we're doing our job. We can look at this pandemic of COVID. Early on, people was like, well, my faith is in God. And that same pastor that said, my faith is in God, we had to bury and say he's resting in the arms of God. Well, praise Jesus. It just takes common sense that doesn't contradict the gospel. It says it's our responsibility to be responsible for these people that God has put on this earth, to cover them, to guide them. And I really feel that's when we then can bridge with our Muslim brothers and sisters, to our Jews brothers and sisters, and so forth. So it starts at home, and we can't continue with the these and thous and turn to this and that. Because if we are still living and rapture hasn't come, we are responsible to continue the writing of the Bible, and we should be able to insert current events that is going to help our community, particularly in HIV and AIDS, that we don't talk about. You have a health ministry, but you're not practicing or teaching HIV health equity. What you want to focus on is high blood pressure, but you preach HIV and health equity, so money can be your next fellowship hall so you can do testing out of it. So I really do feel that bridging religion and faith is important, especially for the constituents that are here in the South, because preachers are golden to us. And sometimes when we don't open up the Bible or we don't understand how to live, if the preacher tells us how, we're going to believe it, and we never did any cross-check.
I just want to add to that. Yes, great thing you said. And when you mentioned about how faith leaders, people listen to them for anyone else, that's very true in the Muslim community as well. We work with an imam who actually lost his brother to AIDS complications. It was him speaking to his community about it that encouraged them to talk about it and have their health ministry have programs about it and get tested. And one of our actual members of Rahma went up there and actually disclosed. We didn't ask him to do that, but he did that. And everyone stopped in their tracks like, oh, wait, there is a Muslim living with HIV or AIDS, and it made them listen. And I know, even how you say, the Islam for the Black community, where I know in D.C. and Philly and New York is really huge population of Black Muslims there, is also a culture for us. Even in Atlanta as well, in Texas, and all over the U.S., the parts of the U.S. It's really Black culture for us, too. A lot of us came to Islam through the Nation of Islam. So we came through it that way. And then we found our own community, and it's something we all, really grew up with. And we listen to our imams and our leaders really, really carefully. So, and unfortunately, there is stigma. There's a lot of stigma in the community. People are judgmental. It's human nature. But and I think the same thing you say about Christians, Muslims, we have to be able to clean our own house first before we can bridge with other faiths as well. So I think we all have a lot of work to do in regards to that aspect. But I think with, people like you, people like me, we're seeing this. So hopefully more people can see it as well. And it can start, making change and start doing true interfaith work and, just dropping down our biases and our perceptions and all the different things and get to work. So.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing both of you say is exactly what Dr. Grimes said earlier, right? Is around how do we approach these communities with a sense of tremendous humility, and not with the arrogance of coming in with a PhD, 2 or 3 of them, and then the know-all, right, around what the problems are for said community. but then engaging the community throughout the entire process. So getting the buy-in from the stakeholders and gatekeepers, and then engaging the community along each step of the process, because what we know more often than not, what happens is people come in, research is done, and you get the findings 20 years later, and those folks are transitioned on. And then you want to do more research, and so that trust is broken, if ever really built, and then the power dynamics are always over and against. And I think, from what Kamarian and Khadijah is telling us, is that it's crucial to really think about gatekeepers. It's also crucial to get buy-in. It's also crucial to keep people engaged throughout the process. And so, Dr. Wallace, your work has been phenomenal over the years, as a house father, legendary, and given the ballroom culture exposure in the public domain now with Pose, and you have legendary Max on HBO, how does pop culture illuminate ballroom community? And I also to Kamarian as well, because there's definitely a huge trans representation in these settings as well. But how has pop culture illuminated the ballroom community, and what are they getting right, and what are they getting grossly wrong, in terms of the way in which pop culture is exposing and shining light on such a powerful community dynamic?
It's a loaded question, Aquarius. I think that pop culture is illuminating ball community. And I think my official response to your question it really sort of stops there. I think a lot of what we're seeing with the different shows is sort of, I think that there are elements of ball culture that are being incorporated into these shows in order to sort of focus them in a certain way. But I don't think that the shows at all represent the complexity or totality of the ball community. I think that the show Legendary is a really good example. I think one of the most interesting things for me about that show is not so much the competitions on the runway, but sort of what's being said behind the scenes between the different houses and the house members and the house leaders, and how that communication translates to who these people are in real life and on the floor. I happen to know many of the folks that are on these shows, and so it's interesting to me to think about how the narrative of ballroom is being painted, and there's a hyper focus, I think, on the competition aspect of ballroom, and really not so much on the house aspect. I think Legendary is doing a really good job of that. Pose has a sort of a dramatized way of doing that, but there's some organic strength in the house component that I think deserves a lot more attention, because and I say this often when I go to events and talk to folks, that there would be at this point in the evolution of the ball community, there would be no balls without houses. And I think that it's an important reality that I think more folks sort of need to sort of latch onto and really, really understand that it is really the core of the community is the house.
And the only thing that I would add, because Father's already spoke, thank you so much, Dr. Wallace, is that when I think of ball and I think of house, that is a chosen family. We're ostracized and oftentimes excluded out of our blood family line. And so when I look at, competitions, or when I look at the culture of house and ball, I'd like to put them together. If we look really closely, we have a blueprint of what this community means. And when I insert the trans community in this type of sector of family, that's exactly what we need. We're competing to have fun, but in real life, we're competing for resources. We're competing for those resources that we're not getting, those positions we're not getting, the presence of who we are. And so, to feel validated, then we have the opportunity to be part of this chosen family, this ball, this housing, among others. And the blueprint is what they've already have developed and what they live daily. We don't live comfortable in society, but when you enter into the ball and house or whatnot, it is a structure for us to be who we are. And so that's the only thing I wanted to add is that for, when we're looking at how we're doing this work to reduce HIV and other communicable diseases, and we're talking about research, we have to just basically look with the neck and eye and say it's always been in front of us. We duplicate what the community feels comfortable, what's their daily living, and not trying to bring them over to our blueprint because that is hindering and that's causing the rates of HIV to go up. That's causing our numbers to embed in research narrative to not show up. And so then we're getting this money, and then this money then turns around to extra money that they have to figure out doing spend town time, what we're going to do with this money. And a new computer is not going to save my life. You understand what I'm saying? It's just not going to do it. A new program is not going to do that. And hiring, a new staff member that, just advanced, out of high school, and now you're putting them out there to outreach because they know the language, but they don't have the capability of the education to outreach to vulnerable communities. That's a challenge for me. So I think when we look at the house and ball scenes that we have a unique blueprint. They are telling us it's on media. Some of us are connected to them, and all we have to do is duplicate and just insert the message and ask them, how effective can this be in your family?
If I can add to that, because when I think about what it means to duplicate, and for me, I guess this clarity is necessary to ensure that that there is an appropriate understanding about engagement of this community by folks who may be listening to this now or in the future. The house and ball community does not need to be saved by anybody who is not a part of the community. The house and ball community has existed for decades. It predates the HIV epidemic. And so I wanted to make sure that I put that out there and was very clear and transparent that the house and ball community does not need white saviors, even if the white saviors look like us. What the house and ball community would appreciate is support so that the house and ball community can do what it does well, which is continue to survive and thrive. And when I think about the initial sort of premise of this conversation about CBPR, and a point that I think you raised, Aquarius, about relegating people to outreach worker positions, how you build and how you connect with people, to me, is in large part informed by the inherent value that you assign them. So if you believe that a community has value, then you're likely to approach them a certain way, versus if you believe that the community doesn't have value. If you believe this particular community is in dire need of your saving, your approach is going to be different than if you believe that these folks have all of the tools that they need, and they just might need a couple of doors open and some support. So when we think about CBPR, I think it's also important that we consider and contextualize the biases that we may approach communities with, and how we assume or not what their value is already prior to us engaging them.
That's great. I mean, and thank you. I think that was just really a good way to really pivot and transition to Delara, who's going to take us to the next level. And it's just this idea around looking at those shows as just like this commodification of culture, this way that we can make profit off of people's pain continually. And, as a person who watches, newly watching Legendary, I was just really struck at like the judging panel and the need to always have like this sort of celebrity influencer to kind of give credit and to ascribe value to what is already, invaluable, which are human beings. And then what are, the broader questions within this moment and context that we're living within? what are companies like FX and HBO doing to actually improve the lives, the quality of lives for folks who are clearly, making tremendous amounts of profit? But I'll decrease so that we can get to the next set of questions. Delara.
Thank you, Aquarius. And I do want to be mindful that we're just having such a delightful conversation, but we are in our last 30 minutes. So I want to try to, maximize the questions, but I also do want to be mindful of everyone and be respectful of everyone's time. We had an audience question that I just wanted to bring in before going to our next set of questions, thinking about the federal government and thinking about eliminating health disparities, particularly in HIV. And that question is, do you think engaging specific communities is more effective than approaching multiple communities and bridging them? So if we want to have maybe two of our panelists respond to that question.
I think it depends on what you're actually trying to accomplish, but I feel like there is power in numbers. So if you have one community doing one thing and another one doing a different thing, doing the exact same thing, if we combine it and do it together, it's much more powerful, it's much more impactful. And if you don't understand that other community, then you can build partnerships and learn from them and grow together. I don't think we're going to end HIV or AIDS by 2030 if we don't collaborate. I think it's very important that people work together to make that happen. So that's just my feedback on that.
And I'll just say it's a both and. I think that the easiest way I can say this is, depending on where you're located, what jurisdiction you're in, if you work for an agency or community, walk in and make an assessment of your own diversity and equitable diversity, and then find out if that's your blueprint, if you're missing anyone that's not part of your reach to reduce HIV in communities.
Thank you both so much for that answer. So Dr. Jeffries, I want to go to you and pivot a bit and kind of think about this conversation in the context of the federal government. So I have two kind of interrelated questions for you that I'm going to raise, and you can kind of answer them however you would like. But the first is, what is the role? Can you detail for everyone on the webinar what the role is of the CDC in eliminating health disparities and conducting health research? And then also, can you kind of put the CDC in context with kind of this community-based participatory research? So the CDC has an Office of Faith-Based Collaboration, and can you kind of detail for us what are some of the investments and challenges as they relate to faith communities, community-based organizations, and this work around health disparities?
Absolutely. It's the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, with respect to communities, primarily funds state and local health departments to implement strategies that prevent disease onset, morbidity, as well as mortality. And in the Division of HIV/AIDS Prevention, we have a strategic plan that is aligned with both the National HIV/AIDS Strategy updated to 2020 and Ending the HIV Epidemic, a Plan for America, both of those initiatives. And that goal is to reduce health HIV-related disparities and inequities. And so CDC's primary role with regard to national efforts is to focus on the population certainly most at risk for disease acquisition, in this case HIV, but to also emphasize the need to address the disparate rates of HIV infection that occur across race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, and to some degree age. And so that's one of the most important things CDC does. CDC also, by way of notices of funding opportunities, or NOFOs, funds many different types of organizations, including community-based and faith-based organizations, to do work that is essential to ending the HIV epidemic. And our most notable flagship NOFO, it expressly names faith-based institutions as some of the types of organizations with which we, as public health professionals, must partner in order to effectively end the HIV epidemic. It's important to know that at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, in the Division of HIV/AIDS Prevention, where I currently serve, the majority of our funds go expressly for HIV-related surveillance, research, and programs, but almost all that money goes toward programmatic work funded through state and local health departments, which many of you as community-based organization representatives know historically has been a challenge. But nonetheless, we do have successes with regard to community-based organizations, state and local health departments, and CDC collaborating to attempt to address HIV incidents, as well as the importance of noting the importance of eliminating HIV-related disparities. And so it's also important to keep in mind that CDC, unlike NIH, does not primarily focus on research. Certainly we do lots of research, but CDC's work is primarily programmatic, whereas NIH's work is primarily research. So with regard to conducting health-related research, and we certainly do that, and we do it in partnership with communities. And so many different entities across the agency emphasize the importance of CDC employees and the agency as a whole collaborating effectively with communities. And we do that by way of NOFOs that are oftentimes specifically directed toward community-based and faith-based organizations, but also through communications in which we emphasize the importance of doing that. And so that's a little bit of what we do at CDC.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jeffries. And I'm delighted that you brought up the Ending the HIV Epidemic Initiative. And I'm going to pivot back to that question if time permits a bit at the end. But I want to take this time to just kind of ask all of our panelists this question. So we want to recognize the roles of historical, medical, and research injustices and exploitation and mistrust that are operating in the background of community engaged research. And I know many of you have kind of talked about much of this earlier on in our conversation, but what are the strategies to break down tensions, stigmas, and mistrust? And how do research institutions and centers and researchers build and maintain trust within communities? And again, we can think about this on the kind of the level of research institutions and centers and researchers, but also we can think about, trust in the federal government as well, and kind of some of the historical and research and medical injustices and that have happened at the level of our federal government. So we can really think about this question broadly. So I open up all of our panelists to kind of talk about this.
This is Tiffany. So many things come to mind on this topic, and I kind of take myself back to my Peace Corps days where I wouldn't just show up, in a community and say, I'm here to save you, or I'm here to bring you all this knowledge or experience that I have, but really going into the community and asking, what do you need? What can I do for you with the resources that I have or with the expertise that I have or the knowledge I have, and less about what I'm trying to get or what I'm trying to learn, but more about how can I serve you. So that's the first thing that comes to mind for me. And I think also acknowledgement, right? Like acknowledging the things that have happened first, which is something our country has not gotten right many times. So I think as researchers, and especially people of color doing this work, we really have to show up and acknowledge and call out when we see injustice and we see things happening that are not okay. And so I think acknowledgement, and then figuring out, how am I going to be a part of the change? What am I going to do? How can I make sure that more of my trans brothers and sisters are sitting next to me so that they can do this research and so that they can serve their communities? And so I think coming in as an outsider, I'm constantly thinking about, what biases am I bringing to this work, and checking in and getting to know the community, and really making sure that the voices that I'm learning from are actually the voices that get credit and are the voices that are uplifted and upheld.
And Dr. Uskup, I think it's very important to note the importance of having minority investigators writ broad. Look at our panel. All the faces you see are African American. African Americans account for approximately 2/5 of all new HIV diagnoses that occur every year, as well as about 2/5 of all persons living with HIV in the United States. And every day in my job, I bring the voices, and all of you certainly do as well. And I'm sure that everybody on who are all the 40 attendees do the same thing. But I bring community with me, and I do not leave that at the doorstep. And it's important for us to be doing the work that is going to save us. We will not, as Black people, as sexual and gender minorities, witness the success of the ending the HIV epidemic, and I'm alluding to what Khadijah said earlier, unless we are leading much of this work. And the federal government, we see a lot of that right now. And we see it across the board from HHS on down, but we certainly don't have enough. CDC, as you know, has funded the Minority AIDS Research Initiative for quite some time now, almost 20 years if I'm not mistaken. And that initiative essentially works to provide funding to young racial ethnic minority investigators who are studying racial ethnic minority issues with respect to HIV to do the work that is necessary. NIH has some similar programs that it funds, but we don't have nearly what we need to have. And it's important for those of us who operate in different spaces to realize that we bring the voices of those who have no voice with us. When I heard my dear sister Comarian speak earlier, my mind went back to Jesus speaking about the least of these among us. And serving the most vulnerable is something that we, irrespective of any religion, faith, or spiritual tradition we have, value. And it's important for me as Billy Jeffries every day, who lives in an all-white neighborhood that is, by God's amazing grace, extremely wealthy, to bring the voices of Day Day and Raekwon and Mubo and them on the west side to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Because if I don't, they will not have a voice. And we should keep that in mind at all times. And so one of the reasons why I study religion and spirituality to the extent that I have is that I know that people who are white will not get it, will not on the whole understand it, and will not, to the extent that we need it to happen, work to address the issues. And we have seen that historically. I'm very grateful that people like Dr. Amy Nunn and Dr. Robin Lancy have done what I would consider to be a phenomenal job with regard to collaborating on faith-based efforts with pastors and other persons of faith all throughout the South. Their work on, quote, faith in action has been impactful, and I cite it and use it all the time. But that's not nearly enough. It's also important to note that we, as vulnerable populations doing this work, need to always emphasize the reasons that we are sick. I cannot remember the exact words my dear brother, Dr. Wallace, used earlier, but essentially he said something like, we must realize that the people who we're trying to serve aren't necessarily sick, and they don't need to be saved, but they have the strengths that we can draw upon to promote health in these communities. And so part of those strengths is us realizing all of the spirituality, faith, the intersectional aspects of our identities, as Comarian alluded to the table as we work to address the underlying issues. And if we don't, we know historically that no one else will.
Absolutely. Would anyone else like to add comments or add thoughts in thinking about prior injustices and kind of building trust in doing research?
I spent my last probably year and a half working through a research project, which many of will know as NHBS, the National HIV Behavior Surveillance. And I would tell you I was very impressed when I was hired to lead that, because I felt for once there is something that's programmatic that got it right. It asked the community what they wanted out of it versus inserting our motives on collecting data. And I bring that up because what I learned from that experience and how it benefited the community was we were able to define what the social determinant of health was for the trans community. And those other projects I worked on with people who inject drugs community and our MSM community, for once it felt like they had a voice. And we compensated them well for their voice. and we were able to bring that information back on a local level and a state level and actually implement what they said and send up the data to where it needs to go for what you need. But it was a great way for us to really poll our community in a different way. And I believe they really appreciated that. Not only did we find out in the area of Texas where I was working that we have, those that have been working in this field, we have been using this academia way of defining social determinants of health and trying to create initiatives that we feel that's inclusive for that community. And as Dr. Wallace said or whatnot, and certainly Dr. Jeff has said, is that, you know, not every community is looking for a savior because they're well. They want to be part of for those that are not. I'm the first to say I used to have a problem saying I'm a trans woman of color. Now I don't, because I realize that we all have our privilege. And when that opportunity is available to us, then I can go help someone else. And so I bring that up because formative work in anything that we do is important. I don't think we'll be effective if we can't do formative work, and not doing it in a way that we're immediately looking for results, but we find ways that we can do the work different and allow us to really redefine for our region, our jurisdiction, our state, what is social determinants of health for our vulnerable and hard-to-reach populations and for our priority populations that we say that we're trying to change. And it goes to allude to the question, you know, individually community reach or collective community reach. It's because we need those voices. And the least you can do, if you're not going to hire us at the moment, find programs that will still take our narrative and we don't feel tokenized. And we know that you will be responsible in delivering what we say we need.
Thank you. And as we work toward closing this, I know this is a very robust group, and this has again just been such a fantastic conversation. So I know this might be a difficult task, but I want to open this question up to everyone, but also want to invite everyone to keep these answers as succinct as possible, so we can again be mindful of the time and turn it over to Dr. Lancey as she closes for us and discusses kind of next steps in our next conversation. But in closing, what research opportunities is our current national climate, and again, thinking about everything that is happening right now in the mass consciousness with the movement for Black lives, and also this Ending the HIV Epidemic initiative that we are in the second year of, what opportunities does that present for HIV research, and how do we get beyond the questions that we've asked? So I invite folks to either ask a question that we need to either ask or to kind of give us a kind of closing comment on what opportunities this current climate presents.
I think some opportunities would be researching the correlation between COVID and HIV. I mean, people are doing that already, but even more so. Systemic racism, discrimination, and living with HIV and contracting it. The similarities between HIV and COVID, if there are any. HIV and COVID both do not have a cure, and if there's any difference in stigma, talking about that. And talk about how it affects people of color. But people are experiencing mass evictions coming up very soon. People lost their jobs due to COVID, lost access to getting care, to take their medication, seeing their doctors. People might have now can't get food. They might be at risk of contracting HIV because now they have more time on their hands, or they're just doing different things. They're not working. They think about homelessness, think about mental health, think about how they can't drive places anymore. And also a main thing for me, of course, is faith services. Like churches are closed down, mosques are closed down. For some people, it's a very important part of their life. And if they can't socialize and go to a place of worship, that can be very detrimental to their health. So think about how COVID and faith and all these different parts correlate. I think it'll be really good opportunities for this. So keep it short.
Absolutely.
Look, a bunch of quiet group. This is at the end. This is almost benediction. Usually people are happy. But nevertheless, I'll just say for me, I would like to see more as it relates from research and also direct services that will really focus on religion and faith. Us knowing more what HIV criminalization is from a policy, how we can get involved with our legislative, how voting plays a huge piece and an impact to HIV and other communicable diseases to reduce that epidemic in communities when they feel empowered, that they have a voice. And as well as, are we, going back just to ensure that we're being, we're offering equality, but more or less we're offering equitable access to what we're already doing and finding out what we're missing that will produce a radical inclusion. And that's what our society needs right now with all of the racism going on, white supremacists, even the discrimination, how they're testing for COVID in certain areas that is still causing minorities to be higher rate of being reactive to COVID. And we need a radical inclusion. And it's going to take all of us, and it's going to take some extended grace. It's going to take that, you know what, I'm not going to hold you accountable because you didn't know, but now you know. It's going to take teaching moments. And so that is not only am I putting in the atmosphere, that's also my prayer, that we use the state of our nation that will give us a blueprint that no communities, there will be no such thing as vulnerable communities, that we will be able to all be able to add to the blueprint that will produce radical inclusion.
Thank you. Would any of our other panelists like to respond? It's truly a unique time given the COVID-19 pandemic, a once in a century pandemic, the protests that have been happening and that have been happening for quite some time, but just this consciousness that is happening around these around the movement for Black lives and these protests and racism. And also, again, thinking about ending the HIV epidemic and some of these other health and economic disparities that are currently happening.
Dr. Uskup, I'd like to challenge the paradigm, overarching paradigm that we oftentimes use when we think about faith-based work and research. And I oftentimes make the argument that we don't need more research to know what we need to do. We need action. And as James wrote, that faith without works is dead. And as faith in works is essentially the title of this webinar series. And given how we need to be doing something. And we don't need any more studies that tell us what we need to do to either prevent HIV or to engage communities. We need to do it. We need to be about it. And if anything that we have learned in this current time is that when traditional methods or more or less the methods that are accepted by society are used to approach, injustice-related things, when these things don't work, we have to go to something else. The protesters and rioters are pointing to that. We have voted, but 300,000 votes in Georgia were taken off voter rolls by, at that time, Secretary of State Kemp, who is now our governor. We voted last Tuesday. I was at the poll at 6:57. I did not leave to 8:30. All across Georgia, we had horrible problems that nationwide people are talking about. We're doing all these things, but they're not working. We oftentimes in public health make the argument that we need research to know what we need to do. But at some point, we have enough knowledge generated through science to know what we need to do. And one of the most important things that we need to be doing with regard to faith in works is challenging the underlying social and structural factors that are making us sick in the first place. One of those is religion-based homophobia. And we know from the research, and I've done some of it, and some of you on this on the panel has done. I mean, in the entire webinar have done some of this as well. We know the harmful effects that homophobia has, and that to a large degree in the United States, albeit not limited to African Americans, homophobia is quite prevalent through religious institutions, especially churches, and we need to challenge it. We need to challenge it by way of our preaching. Because I remind folks all the time, it's no coincidence that David and Jonathan had the essentially love affair that they had if you read the book of Samuel and read it for what it says. And to the extent that all lives, especially definitely all Black lives matter, and all queer lives and all transgender lives matter, we need to, as people of faith, constantly and persistently challenge homophobia, both within and outside of religious settings. And those of us who are scientists like me need to do that in scientific and other public health arenas. But those of us who are people of faith like me need to be preaching about the importance of radical inclusion, because that is, in fact, one of the underlying principles that Jesus and Muhammad and many other religious leaders have traditionally used to make the argument that the God of the universe is not just the God of the privileged, but also the God of the vulnerable and the weak. And until we get to the point that everybody is valued, we will not have justice.
Dr. Jeffries, what a way to end and to bring us back to the title of Faith and Works. Absolutely, faith without works is dead. And I want to thank you for that, and for all of our panelists, and for our my co-moderator, Aquarius, thank you. And I want to, at this point, turn it over to Dr. Robin Lancey, our fearless leader, as she details for us our next conversation and offers briefly closing remarks.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Laura. And thank you to Aquarius for doing an amazing job moderating this, and so blessed to have you doing that, and inspired by our panelists and the walk that you walk every day, and how it's really, I feel like, such a call to action now. I mean, I know we've always been in this call to action, but I think it's so prominent now. I think of the 3 pandemics that we're going through right now. Of course, COVID-19 for quite some time. Now with the blatant, even more pronounced anti-racism, and the underlying across the board health inequities. And it's, I think, no more pronounced than today, these days. And I feel so fortunate to be working with you all and collaborating on ways, as I feel like what Jeffrey was saying is really challenging the people of faith community and challenging them to do better, and to open their eyes and have an open heart. And I appreciate that call to action to all of us. I recognize who I am, being a white person, and appreciate the comments, and am really focused on listening, learning, and walking the walk. And so I appreciate everyone's openness and heart in sharing. We will be posting the recording on our YouTube channel. So we have a UAB CFAR Behavioral and Community Sciences Core Faith and Spirituality website or YouTube channel, as well as a Facebook page that's live streaming now. So all of the information can be gleaned there if you would like to share that too. And I know what we plan to do as the planning team is continuously think about the comments that are made, the discussion, and how we can really figure out a way to share this. I think this could be a white paper, you know, a paper that really describes the lessons learned, and a great product that could be shared as we talk about doing community engagement. And so I think it's important for researchers to hear it, as well as the community and all of our partners. Our next webinar, July 21st, from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Central Time. And that one is going to focus on HIV research and ethics. And so we are looking forward to another esteemed panel to discuss. And we, as always, welcome your feedback and hope that you will take a few moments at the end of this, when it closes, to be able to share your feedback and help us really know who's coming to the table, and what we need to be doing to address who's attending these. So if you don't mind completing those questionnaires at the end. It's a very short one. So in closing, thank you again. And I do feel like I've been in the Word throughout the past hour and a half, and I'm thankful. So thank you again, and much love to you all.